Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Lady Scientist Podcast. I'm your host, Jocelyn Pearl, and tonight we have Amal Katrib. She's a senior data scientist, and she's now working on a few new ventures, including writing a book about how to assess health risks in a world filled with fake news. Really excited to talk about that. She's also working on a telemedicine platform called eSAHA that hopes to connect more Doctors Without Borders to refugees and people in underserved populations. Really exciting venture. Before we dive in with Amal, I just want to shout out to all of our new listeners, all of our early listeners. Thank you for bearing with us during the early days of this podcast and subscribing to our YouTube channel. If you can, subscribe, like. I know it's annoying to hear, but it does really help us out. And now all of the episodes are on Apple Podcast and Spotify. So if you want to listen on your way to work, that's a great venue. So Amal, thank you for joining us. And I think I want to dive right into your book, I think first is what I'm like excited to hear about. So tell us
that's a good
where this concept came from and how it's going and what it's going to be about.
So it's actually, to be fair, the book is initially the baby of a UCLA professor. He's got a lot of clinical expertise, so he's very knowledgeable on the medical biochemical side of things. And it's also an ex-colleague from UCLA who was a postdoc for a while, and I think right now is also a senior data scientist as well. And they wanted to work on this book because now, especially nowadays, because of the pandemic, people are receiving a flood of information. And since we're all trapped inside, everyone is even more so on their computers and using the internet and in some cases social media as sources of getting the information about what's going on, how bad, etc. And so people are noticing it's hard to tell which of it is correct. What does this really mean? How do I know if this is actually affecting me? So this is where it became even more so of a realization that this is something we want to tackle. It already exists in terms of diseases in general, so we want to address it overall, but especially now because it's really hard for people to do so. I mean, because there are many reasons why it's hard, they can't tell which is correct. Some of it is because of the health literacy side, like the actual knowledge of the biology and the biochemistry and the underlying everything. But some of it is also the media literacy, which is how do you navigate this? How do you actually, can you spot the delivery style, the communication method being used here? And what kind of skill set or mindset do you need to have to be able to navigate this crazy world? So that's kind of the point of the book. So they reached out initially to take a look at the book, provide some input. And I think we saw that there was a nice different mindsets amongst each other, because we've got the clinical medical side, we've got my colleague who is a statistician, and you got me, which is I'm more on the biology side of things. So it was nice to convey all of those things, have a very multifaceted delivery method for the book, and that's kind of what we wanted to get out, and we're working on right now, and let's see what the rest of the world thinks of it.
Wow, that's really exciting. So is it a completed manuscript, or are you guys, still writing the chapters?
A lot of it is actually written right now. I think we still haven't reached out. We're going to try to reach out to publishers supposedly end of this year. So it's I'm a little behind myself on my part. But that's the goal, is to get these at least a few out to the publisher. But we have most of it down right now. And
Awesome.
depending on the process, whether it's a traditional publishing or self-publishing,
yes,
time frame of when it'll be out.
Yeah, I'm actually going through a little bit of that right now with querying agents for a book I wrote this year as well, and it's such an interesting process. So I found this Manuscript Academy. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a online community that you can get some more input on your query process and how to get your manuscript published. It's been really helpful for my for my own journey with that. But I'm super excited to see the manuscript whenever you're ready to share.
Yeah, I
I
would
think
love
that's a
that. It's actually nice to get the different perspectives, because I think that's the point of it is that there's so many different sides, and it might be not the one ground truth. I think it's just nice to know, like,
sure.
when should you doubt this? When should you take it at face value? So yeah, I would love to actually get that. So yeah, as soon as we have something that's a little more shareable, looks good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an interesting point with, the different facets and the different views, because of course we've both worked in these environments. When I was at the Institute for Systems Biology, we worked with clinicians on Huntington's disease, for instance, and they have such a different mindset. And I even did a clinical rotation at UW where I was going in with this clinician that I worked with and getting to see her interact with her patients that had these genetic diseases. And it was really powerful in a way because it just felt more tangible than what I was doing on a day-to-day basis with, mining data sets and trying to understand the disease from this molecular level. So I think it's kind of an interesting part of what we do as scientists, right? Is to connect with people from like the different levels.
Mhm.
Um,
No, 100%. And I think that's what we exactly saw. And that's kind of why we all decided to join in on this, is because no one has everything it entails. Like I don't have the one-on-one experience. And I'm, after all, also not a clinician. So there's that mindset, there's that experience that comes in handy. But at the same time, I've dabbled so much into the underlying biology, and that's also really precious to know. And computationally, like, we want to know how all the little biases that we don't notice when we do the analysis. We just do it because that's the standard approach. But sometimes, is it true? Just because this is what everyone does not make it correct. So it's nice to get all those different perspectives. And I'd love to see more of that, even in scientists, like people like just branch out of their own comfort zone, whether delve into something themselves or collaborate with others that are outside their fields to bring in a different perspective.
Absolutely. And that reminds me of something in your email where you mentioned chasing after techies to, keep the science in data science. Can you talk about that experience at all?
Yeah, this is, I tell people, sometimes I come across as this old-fashioned scientist of a mindset, because a lot of times, I actually, initially when I got into computational biology, so that's most of what I did, I was focused so much on like, let me acquire the computational skill sets. Let me do this. Let me do more of that. Oh, now I want to even go even more advanced. Now machine learning is average. Let's go into deep learning. Let's go into like so many different levels. But then I noticed that people started fixating so much on that side, which is one layer, so the data side of things, with sometimes, and was strange to see, a little understanding of what that data is, what it means, and what to even do with it. And that's when I noticed that actually we have a different problem sometimes. And it's not, of course, everyone, but it is not uncommon to see that people just go with the data and process it, and they might have no background in it. And that's okay. You would not expect it to have everything, but you could also reach out and talk to people and get their perspective. And that's kind of what I felt like in general, my role, whether it was in the PhD, whether it was later on, was more on let me just tell you why you might want to incorporate here a hint of a priori knowledge, because it will get you some of that signal that you lost right there, because you can actually shrink it down, and safely so. Like, you're not actually, you account for that as a bias, but at the same time, it is safe because you're looking at this. So for example, if you want to study, let's say, something related to pregnancy and you're interested in the placenta, if you can actually like try to remove some of the genes that are not at all related, for example.
Oh, yeah.
So that's kind of those things, like, of course, I don't expect everyone to know, which is why it's good to, even if you can, have the science, great. But if not, reach out to those who really understand that data. So that's what I want, seeing in data science, is the scientific side of it, which is going through the scientific method, kind of that you have an idea in mind, you collect your data, you analyze, you see some things, now you collect even more data, now you bring in some different perspective. And I told people, like, kind of the job of a detective, when they go to a scene, like a crime scene. I mean, the detective, of course, has experience, has some understanding, knows where to go. He doesn't just randomly collect data. He doesn't just process and think, oh yeah, there you go. He goes between the two, and I think that's kind of the converged framework that I like, the data and a priori knowledge and hypothesis that I like seeing. So more of the scientific method approach in data science. And yeah, that's what I
Absolutely.
love doing.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important because one thing I was impressed by, so similar to what you were talking about with computational biology and wanting to gain this skill set, that was something I came into graduate school. I didn't know how to code. I wanted to gain that skill set. And as soon as I started analyzing, big data sets, I realized just like the wealth of data that we have available to us in this day and age for biology, right? Like all of these different organizations putting data on geo public databases that you're able to just download and analyze. And it's almost like there's not enough computational biologists for us to really parse it and understand what the value is in these different data sets. Like there's just so much out there at this point, and it keeps getting generated, right? Like we keep generating more and more data, and it's just crazy. Like, the needle in the haystack of a hypothesis that could allow us to understand a disease or understand a drug. I think that requires what you're talking about with the scientific approach and the biology lens and understanding, the tissue and the genes that are being expressed and all of that. Because when it comes down to it, my opinion of data science is basically you need to be able to understand, the signal to noise. That's kind of the essential thing. And in order to generate high quality signal, you need to, clean the data set. Like you need to focus on the genes that are of interest or the gene pathways that are of interest and not just look everywhere, right? Because otherwise your false discovery rate is going to be impacted.
Exactly.
Um,
I mean, actually, I
yeah,
think this is a big focus nowadays, is because we're all trying to get into the blood-based biomarker side of things, because it'd be nice to actually be able to diagnose something or infer like what stage of the disease you're at or what course of treatment is best for you by looking at your blood. But I think this is where that comes in handy, when you're able to distinguish based on like the organ specific or tissue specific or even cell type specific like expression patterns, you can actually safely isolate the signature that you're most interested in. And I think this is a big focus and a lot of efforts now, because as I said, they want to try to see a way where we can take these findings to the clinic, and blood is one of the easiest ways we can do so. Yeah, that's I think more and more, I'm hoping to see more of this, like people realizing we need both. Again, the hypothesis mindset, but also the strong data and computational mindset.
absolutely. Yeah, and I think one area that I'm excited about for, big data or biomarkers like you're talking about is where the higher dimensional data acquisition is actually what's allowing for us to detect signal. So I think of a company like Grail, where they have a blood test for a pan cancer blood test, and they're able to take someone's blood and say, you have early stage ovarian or you have early stage pancreatic cancer. I mean, that's, that is the holy grail in a lot of ways. That's what the company was named for. So I think we're getting there in a way. Like there is some exciting venues for high dimensional data, and maybe we can touch a little bit on the lack of progress though, because I feel like there's also this whole realm of like not enough signal. Like there's just, and machine learning, like that gets thrown around all the time, or AI. I'd be curious for your thoughts on like the negative side of like how we hear, oh, AI is just going to change our world, and machine learning, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, and I think so. And the thing that I related to what I was commenting on before, the idea is like, just because we have all of this doesn't mean you shouldn't think through the problem. And I think we lose so much by not thinking through it. Kind of like, for example, like you don't always have to add in hypothesis or prior information, but sometimes if you really think about it, I'm like, actually, if I do this here, I can like focus my work on this side here. And now I'm actually able to see more of a stable pattern. So for example, if you try to get something reproducible, I mean, good luck. Sometimes it's really hard, especially when you're going on the protein side of things. But you can also try, if you that's why you have to think a bit through that problem. But what do I really want? Maybe I don't really care necessarily about the stability here. Maybe I want to go beyond just looking at the one biomarker. Maybe I want to look at the congregation of those, at a few of them, because those few here represent a pathway or a certain characteristic that tells me something about this disease, that can tell me if you're, for example, going right now through a bout of high inflammation, high immune response, etc., versus you're going through something that's more on the necrotic side of things, or even metabolism alteration side of things. And I think the idea is keep thinking through it. So just because you can gather all this information and you can apply all these fancy tools, I mean, anyone can take a course in data science these days online and learn this, but not everyone has the ability to think through this. And I think this is where it's key to actually think through the problem instead of just throwing in all these fancy tools that some of them are not even geared to this problem. Like if you have a small data set, I mean, in certain cases, because you can't actually have more, we can't gather more. What do you do then? Chances are that the fancier and fancier tools won't actually do that here. But and again, different problems for a different case. But I think again goes back to just think, keep that scientist in you alive and think through your problem.
Absolutely. I love that. So I'm curious, you have had a really interesting year. You've taken some time off from, a traditional employment, I guess. And I think one thing that's typical of people like us in this career path is that we don't necessarily take a lot of time off. I mean, I know for me, I got to a point where I realized I hadn't taken significant time off until just before I started grad school, and that was in 2013, and we're now in 2020. So
same.
how has this time off been for you? I read your article also on the is it the Lebanon Mountain Trail that you
no. Yeah, I
ran?
actually didn't think anyone would even notice that, and I just randomly added it. But yeah, that's awesome.
But I'd love to hear about, the value of this time off for you and how that changes how you think about the world and how you think about yourself as a scientist, and kind of I mean, obviously you have lots of new directions you're going with things. So maybe you can touch on that a bit.
Yeah, I think this is, so self-reflection is something many scientists, I think, in general do. And I maybe take it a little too much, a little too far. But I think that's part of what kind of like leads to those decisions in my life where I want to take a tiny bit of time off, or I want to adjust my focus, or I want to dabble into something else. And as you said, like, I think a lot of us in science don't fully take time off. But I used to tell people, like, there's a difference between taking time off from something you feel like you have to do versus something you really love doing and you're obsessed with because this is your passion. Like, there are times I'm playing the piano nonstop on it, but I mean, should I feel bad about it? I love that. Like that's my passion. And I see that sometimes with science, and again, science being whether it's research or related to that. So teaching, writing, etc. We never take a lot of time off because we want to dabble, we want to play a little bit more. It's our little game. It's something we love. So I honestly, like, yeah, as you said, I actually hadn't taken like full time off, like properly, except the last time was before the PhD, which was actually also 2000, I think 12 or 13. And but even now, like I am taking some bit of time off, but it's actually not like really off. I mean, I'm right now in the office. So there's a lot of like, oh, what do I want to do? Here's what this is a new idea that I want to work on. I want to put out this startup that I had worked on before with the UCLA students / alumni. I want to get this book going. I want to actually get back to focusing on women's health. So that's always going to be, I think, in us. And I think that's what drives us. We love it. No one is telling us to do it. We just want to do it. But that's, yeah, I think it's nice to have. And I think that the hint of time off or shifting from your traditional work is what allows you to actually think, what is actually the most important thing to me right now? And that's what I'm doing is why do I want to focus on this? Because I've always said I wanted to actually do this. So going into women's health, because honestly, I wanted to work in an area where I was seeing very little attention, where it wasn't the most, it wasn't the sexiest topic in terms of funding, honestly. But honestly, there's a lot of unmet needs. I'm like, I always said that. Actually, I should then go back to that if that's what I care about. So that's what the bit of time off from your typical day-to-day helps do.
So are you working full-time on your startup, or is it like a self-funded, I work on my different projects as much as I want? I'm just curious, like in general, how what your days are like, or how you split up those different paths.
So this is also pretty recent anyways, where like I had actually the more flexible. Okay, to be fair, I like a flexible schedule, so never mind. I'm obsessed with having a non-defined like schedule for work because I do like working, for example, in the evenings and running to the mountains in the day. But so for the previous startup, and I said I wanted to revive this one that we have right now. It's incorporated, and you alluded to it earlier in the intro, which is the telemedicine startup. And that one, so it started actually when I was doing towards the end of the PhD, and we're a few people that were involved in it. And yeah, we had secured a bit of funding, and we went to do a lot of pitches, and we even got to go to Dubai for a random pitch. It was a contest that we got selected for as finalists, or regional finalists rather. And yeah, so we had a little bit of fund accumulated to help support it. But other than that, the cost was actually pretty minimal, that we didn't actually have to seek out a lot of outside funding, and everything, like in terms of whether it was having the server, having even the hosting, all these things where it was actually from our own pockets. And that was easy to do because, again, it's telemedicine where everything is online. And at the time it was meant to be specific. So we're specifically focusing on refugees. So it was actually a free, free service. So the idea connecting volunteer medical providers to those who need it. So then there's also no cost to anyone actually. So to keep it going was actually pretty low cost. And that's why it was easy to do that. I think for the remaining ventures, which is what I'm hoping to get back to, which is the women's health side, because in terms of, I saw that in research and I randomly stumbled upon that was actually not my background. My background was more on the neuro side of things, dabbled a bit into cancer, but again, still more on the neuro side. But I randomly got this data set, and it was at the time for human placenta. And I was playing with it. Initially, it was just so I can get familiar with RNA sequencing, just know the different layers of analysis you can do. And it was just a quick thing to play with. But then I noticed when I was just reading papers to learn more about, honestly, I don't know anything about the placenta, that there was so much that actually wasn't being done there. And then so much of the focus of the advances in the computational side not being applied there, where they actually could use some of that. But the reason I actually was seeing it, even from my own experience, it wasn't getting the most attention because it wasn't like the topic to, again, not what I tell people, the sexiest topic when you apply for grants. So even when I was going to apply for things, that one was getting actually the least funded. But then all the other ones that were already super funded to begin with, like so many people are working in these fields, but they were the biggest attention because, oh, this is the new cool thing. This is the new cool tool. We can do this. But even though people are not realizing, there's so much right now not happening in a field that really needs it. And that's what I'm going back to. And for now, there's no funding that I secured yet for that, because I'm just thinking through that with a friend of mine on how we want to approach this. Because do we want to go the venture capital way for this, or do we want to do a crowdsourcing or different way? Again, depending on the objective or the goal with this, I think that's what we're trying to figure out before jumping into the funding, because then that gets very tricky to fix after.
That's awesome. I'm really excited to hear you say that this is something you're passionate about, because I talked to Allie as well for the podcast, and I think through working with her at ISB, I did gain an appreciation for how underfunded women's health and reproductive health really is, and how little we know. Like I talked about asking my doctors, what they know about pregnant women being on a particular medication. And it's, the data is just really hard, even for me as a scientist, to get a hold of and understand, because there's so little of it out there. So that's awesome. And if there's anything I can do to help with that venture as well, please hit me up. Like, I know a few people in the VC space, and I think it's so important that we, generate better data sets, but also have more clear understanding of how our world impacts, pregnant women or women in general.
Exactly. And that's why that's why I meant, like, when I in terms of funding, like, we're taking our time with that aspect, because I think we're asking ourselves, like, what is our goal after, like, with this? Like, do we want to just have something that's stable, that's guaranteed route, like, that we know is going to fit right now with the exciting field? Like, right now, what's really exciting is the focus on biomarkers, let's say, on collecting, on doing multi-omic profiling, gathering as much about this condition so we can really say what's happening. The problem comes when it comes to women's health, especially if you're going on the hormonal side of things. We don't really understand what it means. It's really hard to know. Again, there's so many layers of difficulty. So are we going to go do that route, or do we want to try to even reach more of the masses? Do we really want to reach those that most people are just not addressing, because again, that's not the most stable revenue stream if you're gonna just fixate on that population. So that's kind of what we're that's why we're taking that part a bit slow, because I think that's gonna impact, again, how we proceed with this. And we wanted to do something that honestly can reach the people that don't get it. I want to reach those who don't know anything about their health. Those are the ones I want to reach. So how do we do so in a sustainable way? And that's kind of what we're thinking about. And I actually would love to, I wanted to bring it up to you. I want to bring it up to Allison. And I wanted it to be a community, honestly, effort, even more so than just the typical traditional pure VC funded style of work, because honestly, I think it's a field that needs it to actually get it going to a point where we see a major change on the clinical side. So how about we all get together?
Yeah, I think of a nonprofit like the Allen Institute, where Paul Allen wanted to put a lot of funding into generating these really high depth data sets for the brain. So they have the Brain Institute, which I've utilized that data. It's an amazing data set. They now have the Allen Institute for Immunology. It's too bad they don't have the Allen Institute for Pregnancy, because there really is such a need to generate this type of data. And it's, your women are pregnant for 9 months. It's a pretty long time course study that we're talking about. And you can imagine just the number of variables that you might want to capture. But what a resource that could be for researchers. So
and I think it's actually a problem that I mean, again, this is maybe my biased opinion, but I think it's more solvable than some, because a lot of times, like, we're trying to predict things that may happen, but we don't know the outcome, and we don't even know what the starting point is. But pregnancy is beautiful because you kind of have an idea when. and you kind of have an idea when it starts, when it ends. So you have kind of that bounded time frame that allows you to actually see changes, and chances are you're going to see things that are early on, the mechanisms that were happening in early pregnancy being just are complete opposite of later on when you want to keep the baby or you want to kick the baby out. So it's actually a very strong signal, and then we have some idea of the changes. So in terms of studying it, I think it's actually a very an easier one to even approach than some of those that we don't even know when they start and don't know if you're going to have that disease or not. But as you said, there's very little funding there, and people can actually see how much funding these topics get by looking at the NIH website. They actually put down usually how much, like in general, how much money grants went into supporting the different topics. And pregnancy, if you look into that, like preterm labor, etc., was getting very, very, very little in terms of how many people, like how much. If you look at how much time or how much life was lost for that versus the others, they were actually, again, not getting a lot of money for something that does really matter, because I think people are just not even paying attention to that. So yeah, I want to see more of that. And if it could be a community, a big effort, if everyone is as excited to make that change, I'd love to go down that route.
Absolutely. So one thing I'm curious about, have you ever considered doing another postdoc? Because that was something when I had some time off this year, and I think similar to you, you have these lingering questions. There's like these lingering research questions that you've always kind of wanted to figure out. And I thought about, well, maybe I should just go and do a second postdoc somewhere and be able to work in a lab again and study this thing that I'm interested in. Is that something you've considered at all?
I think it depends on what I want to do. It depends on the person, of course. Like if your goal is that you want to acquire a skill set, or you want to better understand this environment or this field or what this work entails, then yeah, that's one side. For me, I think I want to actually get these things out so they make it to the public and make that change. So beyond just like, I guess, even beyond academia, even beyond industry, because they're still driven by a specific goal in mind. I wanted to get something truly to the community. Kind of this whole like decentralized approach to healthcare. Like I want to show that we care. Like I want you to have like a handle of your own health so you can have a voice and actually care for your own self, and feel like you are able to do so. And I think for me, I want to be more on that, which is actually take that action. Take that step and plunge into it, more so than getting another skill set. Like that would of course be helpful.
Sure.
But I think if I don't do, like I'm struggling already, like it's always hard to get things into action. And I think that's already going to take a lot, that I'm just going to dedicate all my energy right now to that and hopefully and see where it goes. But that's, I think right now, my biggest focus, more so than skill set, or also
Awesome.
maybe later though, I might, I probably will have to, because I'm still not the expert. There's a lot to learn in women's health, and I am far from understanding even 1% of it.
Can you touch on kind of your unconventional path in science and what that's been like for you?
Yeah, and you commented I definitely have a very zigzaggy way of doing it in science, and I guess doing it in life as well. And it's something I just have. I enjoy that. I don't like having the steady anything. So like for some people, having a stable career, having, let's say, a guarantee like income, source of income, etc., is good. For me, in some cases, actually it's terrifying, which is odd, and not necessarily the typical. And I can't explain it. Maybe it is a bit of craziness, but I think it's what it is that I like if I think this is an exciting thing and is necessary to work on, I want to do that. And I want to dedicate time to that. So that's why I varied the things I've done, even in science, I vary them so much. So sometimes I'm doing, yes, the pure scientific research side of things. So that's like the PhD, the postdoc, and even like when I worked in the startup in industry in biotech, it was still heavy on the research side of things. But then I also enjoy the communication of science because that has so much effect on whether it affects us directly with our research or have the appreciation amongst the public for it, because ultimately I want the public to benefit from this research. So I've dabbled into different things, like, for example, the book that I'm working on right now. In the past, I've helped done a lot of the script editing. So living in Los Angeles, of course, it's fun to dabble into the entertainment business a little bit, and I found it exciting. I remember the American Film Institute was looking for science advisors for the conservatory fellows. And so they have a few science-based scripts that they just wanted people to kind of guide people, like, to get their input on, and just to make sure that the science is correct or the information is relayed appropriately to the public. And I thought that was really fun to do. So yes, here I'm applying my science to something that's not typical of a scientist's career path. And teaching was another one that I thought was really fun to do. And I know a lot of people that have done it. Some end up realizing how much they absolutely love it, and some just do it because they have to, as if they go into academia. But I thought that was also really fun to do because you also get to really understand your science when you have to take it down to the basics and be able to explain it to someone else who has no idea what you're talking about. I think that's when you start really developing that deep level of understanding of your science. So I've done many different types of teaching, whether it is like undergrad, like university teaching. So I recently taught at UW, and it was, of course, virtual because we're in a pandemic. But yeah, so I did like some of that, but I've also taken it like down to the mentoring side, where I'm working with, let's say, gifted high school students that are doing their own research projects because they want to. So helping them like find spaces like to carry on their experiments, helping them find the funding, helping them think through the ideas or assumptions that they're making. That's a fun science exercise that's not directly related, but I think, again, helps me get an even deeper level understanding of my science. And I think it's fun to be able to do those different little things. So it doesn't have to be just the research typical of academia or the typical teaching or even industry. I think people think, are you doing this or are you doing that? I'm like, you can honestly do it all and pick and choose. It depends on what interests you. And for me, that chaotic style, the dabbling into everything, is actually what drives me. And I was glad that I could do that with science.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know on your Twitter you have something like teetering on the edge of chaos, which I love.
Yeah.
I feel like that's like so descriptive of my life as well. It's like,
I honestly knew you'd relate to that.
like,
But
if I don't have a million projects going on, like, something's wrong. So,
and we enjoy it. That's the thing. Like,
no, yeah,
and like, why change that? Like, I think before, when you're younger, you're a little more self-conscious, and you still have a little bit of that imposter syndrome, which I think when you're older, I just don't care anymore. You know what? Even if I think I don't care.
I feel like this year in particular, with my writing and with certain aspects of my life, I've been self-assessing, like, was there something holding me back before, and what was it? And I think part of it is finding your voice. It sounds cliche, but it's like, I kind of knew I had a voice before, but I just didn't it wasn't being fully expressed. And I feel like this year, for some reason, I'm just like, here I am, I'm doing all these things now because that's who I am, and like I'm completely comfortable with it. But I wanted to highlight something you said about the science, and I think something I heard recently that is super important is that the science isn't done until it's communicated. And I think that's part of what this podcast is all about, and part of what I see our roles as is like, we can't just live high up in this castle with this information and keep it to ourselves, right? Like, our job isn't done until we share that with others and we say, hey, this is how I think about things, or this is how this drug is made, or this is how this vaccine works. Like, I think that's going to be really important in the next couple of months, is communicating to others what this vaccine is all about and why it's important. So it's just nice to hear that from another scientist, that you care so much about that aspect of our jobs.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, and again, everyone is driven by different things. Like, I got into science because, I mean, yeah, call it naive. I wanted to actually do something with it. I wanted to actually see it use and benefit, like, to and have others benefit from it. And that's what got me into it. Honestly, if it was purely to make money, I mean, there's many different ways to do that. Yeah, I want to be able to live and I want to support myself, but I think I want to be able to see the science really lead to something. So getting it to people, that's ultimately the goal. And that's why, and I know we're not told this, or we're so busy with our research, sometimes we don't have time to even think of how, like, to think of this, or even dedicate any energy to it. But I think sometimes that's actually some of the most that you should dedicate your energy to, because that's ultimately what you want to get, like what you want to do with this. Again, depending perhaps on the goal that you have in your life, but if your goal is to get your science to the public, then yes, communication is very key. And knowing, like, understanding it, like, again, like, developing that ability to understand it amongst the public is critical, because that also shows that you really understand it as well. So yeah, I honestly dedicate a lot of times to, whether it's through writing or even visualization, which I'm beyond obsessed with. It's a little worrisome how obsessed I am. I think I'm drawing more than I'm even sciencing sometimes. But I think that's actually,
Really?
yep, a little too much.
Drawing, like, illustration?
So it's a lot of times I think more on the figures, but kind of putting together your results in a way where it's you get your message through. So I think a lot of times people just, yeah, we're gonna do this, we're gonna plot it out, and here I'm like, you realize how much you miss. You actually miss, like, ability to see a signature here that's really interesting, or conveying how important this is of a again, of a question to ask, or even a result. So visualization is, I think, super, super critical, even for scientists. So I spend a lot of time thinking, okay, what is my point behind this? What am I trying to achieve with this? And then how do I best do so? And since for some reason I'm very, very obsessed with really, really good graphics, I actually end up spending a lot of nights, a lot of all-nighters, honestly, purely doing that. So taking it from the
Yeah.
figure to Illustrator to beyond.
I'm glad you brought that up, because when I was talking about having you on the podcast to Jeff, my husband, he said, "What's a data scientist?" And I was kind of breaking it down for him, like, a data scientist is a computational biologist. They are looking at data sets. They're, discovering hypotheses, but a lot of it is data visualization. And I definitely learned that very quickly at ISB when I was in, the Price lab, where figuring out the best ways to plot these things in R, I was like addicted to Plotly and like making pretty figures, and that was a lot of like what my time was spent doing. And I think you're right, that's going to be the critical piece of how you communicate what you found in this data. And it is such a rabbit hole too, in a way.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I think it's a chunk of the work, like the analysis sometimes, I mean, even big data, yeah, it's running like on a cluster, so I'm not on it sometimes, but even analyzing it and all that, that's a percentage. But then what this means, how do I best convey this? And even for me to perceive a pattern or maybe think of something new that I hadn't thought of before, that's where the visuals again come in place. Oh, that's probably, I can even say up to like 80% of the work, because again, it helps me, it helps others, and kind of gives me that, ooh, interesting, I'm seeing something here I didn't think of before. So yeah, that's why I end up actually spending a lot of time on that. And yeah, I take it a little too far sometimes, so that's everyone notices, so they all started sending me all their plots and the results are like, oh, can you do this? I'm like, okay, I can't be my only job.
Yeah, no, it's like the event planner, you know, like if you start planning too many events, they just ask you to do it all the time. That's awesome. What else did I want to ask you? So you grew up in Dubai, and then how old were you when you came to the United States?
I was 16.
Wow.
That
Oh
was
my gosh. What was that like? Like, tell
uh,
us about that.
I think my roommate in college could have a lot of things has a lot of things to say about this. I remember, so this is when I lived in the dorms, and I remember people occasionally knocking and asking, are you the 16-year-old? And I was like, this is great. I already was like a very socially awkward person. I really struggle. Like I've never really I've never interacted with a lot of people. I had it so bad. I mean, I already was like, a lot of people were asking, like I was borderline autistic in the sense of like I actually used to hide in the bathroom and like during lunch breaks up until maybe like 9th or 10th grade. And I don't know how many people knew that, but yeah, I was always
Wow.
like hiding away from people. So to go from that, which is,
Because you were shy?
I think I was shy and I was very odd and different. And I think at the time I was just very tired of hearing how odd and different I was. And I
Yeah.
think it was something, and again, back to the imposter syndrome, like some of us already know like they were different. So being told that again and again,
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, I got it. So now when people tell me, I'm like, great. Yeah, I know I am. Cool. I like it. When you're young though, less cool. You're scared, you're confused.
Sure.
So yeah, I
Well, I
went
think
from,
it's like no one knows us better than ourselves, right? Like we're so much more self-aware than other people. So like them telling you how you are is just redundant, right? Like
exactly. And that's, but that didn't help necessarily build that social skill set that honestly would have been good to have going into college, living in the dorms in a completely different culture.
mhm.
And the Arabic culture is not at all similar. So yeah, there's of course it's a bit more conservative than I hear. And I
Uh-huh.
think a lot of that was also going on that, yeah, the first year I was telling friends, I could honestly, just from the first year of college, I could write a whole book series because
Oh my gosh.
there's so many things that I realized, especially since I was so cut off from the world to begin with. So stepping
Mhm.
into the dorms completely, I mean, I've never seen people drink before. I'm not kidding.
Wow.
There's a lot of things that
Oh
I
my
didn't
gosh.
know. So first time I saw that, I was like,
Right. So do people not drink in Dubai? Like I've heard that you can only drink in the hotels or something.
so
I've never been there, so I don't know.
and that they so they're different, but so they do, it's, I mean, it's westernized, but there's always like the side of like, this is the touristy side, and there's also the people that just grew up or lived there, and they're
Mhm.
very vastly different. And in Dubai overall, I mean, it's overall a religious country, but yes, there is, because it's westernized, there is a more acceptance of things that are not as okay, let's say, in the religion. So yeah, in hotels you drink, you're not usually seeing alcohol around, but people do, because again, it's more westernized. There are people from all over the world.
Mhm.
There's it's most people in Dubai are not from Dubai. I'm technically, for example, my family is originally Syrian Lebanese, even though I was born and raised there. So there's a lot of that. So yeah,
Sure.
so there is, of course, a little more openness than like what I'm saying, but I also was very socially awkward, that, as I said, like I
Mhm.
didn't really interact with many people to begin with. So if you already have that, since it's not readily available in front of you, you're not going to see it. Um,
Right. Okay. So
oh,
you're in college, you've never seen people drink before. You're 16 years old, everyone else is 18 or 17.
oh, if not, I
What?
mean, I knew people that were 19, 20, even the first year, and and it was
Yeah.
special.
What did your parents think? Like, were they comfortable with you going into that environment?
So they weren't happy about that idea, and I insisted on it Now I insisted on it because, of course, as a kid, I don't know what they're afraid of. I thought that they're
Sure.
afraid I'm not going to be able to keep up pace wise with the
Mhm.
medication. But at the time, again, I was social awkward. So honestly, that was the only thing I excelled at the time, was
Mhm.
studying. Like I actually did really well on that side. So I was like, I don't know what you guys are worried about. That's actually like, I'm very good, like comfortable with this. Little did I know that I was missing a completely like complement opposite side, which is super critical to make it in life. I don't know how to communicate and interact with humans. And that was terrifying. And
Mhm.
yeah, they were not very happy, but they also knew why I wanted, because I wanted to step out of that. I wanted to not always be that shy and scared. Yeah, I'm different, but I don't want to be the scared and shy. I want to actually embrace it.
Mhm.
I want to go beyond the comfort zone, and going away from my parents at the time was the way to do it. It's very painful and hard, but I knew I needed to do that. And I think they complained less when, like, because I went to a school, like I got a scholarship. I was like, okay, I'm picking the school, so it's not going to be expensive. So
Mhm.
come on, guys. And yeah, I
And
think
where did you go?
so. I went for undergrad was George Washington. So I did it was an accelerated like bachelor's, master's
Mhm.
program. So you can,
In DC? Is
Mhm,
that in DC?
mhm.
Yeah, okay.
And yeah, so I did
So you
that.
were in a metropolitan US city
Yeah.
after growing up in Dubai.
Oh yeah, that was as I said, I even the first night being in the dorms, as I said, I've never seen people drunk, so I don't know how people act when they're drunk. And to me, I was like, what planet is this? It was just completely new. So I was
Wow.
absolutely terrified, but I think there's so much to be gained from stepping out of your comfort zone. And I think, I mean, in hindsight, like honestly, there's so many things I wish I had like known, and because it was actually pretty scary and chaotic, and there's more that go on. And again, there's my roommate could elaborate on this and share a lot. And I can share a lot if you want to, but I think it is nice to sometimes not just be like stay in that place, because it is actually even enriching for you ultimately. Like I
Sure.
grew so much from that. Yes, it was hard at the
Absolutely.
beginning, but the person I was before, it's not that it's gone. I have another layer to me now, and that's something I wanted to get, honestly. And
Yeah. I think that's something you and I actually have in common is that drive to push ourselves into these uncomfortable situations. Like I did something similar at, 12 years old. I asked my parents if I could go to boarding school because I was growing up in this small town in Wisconsin and I had learned about this school and I just thought it was like a science and technology focused school and I was like I told them it was my destiny to go there.
oh,
And, so I left home at 14 and I think there's been so many iterations of that of like exposing yourself to new things and that's part of how we learn. That's part of how we absorb new environments and grow as people, right? And grow stronger. And I think it ties into both of our drives to experience outdoors as well. Like you've done a lot of outdoor exploration. I think it's kind of a similar personality trait that gets us out there. So it's neat to hear about your experience, like going to college like that. I can't even imagine.
see, remember,
Um,
teetering at the very edge of chaos. That's why I said, you know
yeah,
what? Might as well embrace it. We're not running away from it. It's in our, like, it's who we are. And it's, I
exactly.
think, actually even more fun to keep it that way. I enjoy it, but
Oh, I do too. I do too. I mean, even this podcast, the first episode I interviewed my former RA from ISB. She worked with me at ISB and um she goes, "I'm really nervous." And I said, "I'm nervous too. I've never done this before. I'm learning how to do this whole new thing as well. Like this isn't, it's not just going to be you. It's me as well." But I don't know. I think minus some of my outdoor explorations that have been questionable from a risk
yeah.
standpoint, which I had a recent experience where a boulder fell and landed like on the rock I had just been sitting on. So I've been taking a bit of a break from my outdoor stuff, but minus that, I think it's all about pushing ourselves, right? Like seeing how far we can go. And maybe you can chat about your running and trail running and your experience going back to Lebanon, right? Is that where you went?
Yeah, so I think yeah, kind of like we do this in science, but we do it also in everything in our lives, and it's always, of course, going to be about the balance. Like, yeah, we do enjoy these things, but it doesn't mean also we're complete idiots. And in some cases, granted, I am, but I'm learning not to. So it's not just going out there and just being chaotic. It's more of knowing like when to actually tune it down, like how to tailor it properly so I actually make the most of this life rather than just end it early. And I think this is what you learn, and the outdoors are like one is exactly a perfect example of that, because that's not something you can just completely let go of everything, because there's a high cost if you're just out there and you don't really take into account the risk that comes along, like whether it's avalanche danger, whether it is even like in my case, which happened actually, so I actually needed rescuing twice. Oddly enough.
Wow.
Yeah, that was one was actually embarrassing of a story. The other one, I actually legitimately fell and hit my back, and I was
Oh my
alone.
God.
And I think so these things, like, so that's why, like, it's nature is not, or just being out there and in the outdoors, it's not something you just want to take for granted and not appreciate the risk. So
Hmm.
that's part of like, it's fun. It's nice to yeah, keep that spirit and do so safely. And I think that's kind of what happens as we learn and we grow older, we start gaining more experience. So like you now taking the time off, for example, that bit of time off is probably going to give you that bit of like, now I know next time I'm going to do this. So I go, for example, I less so alone now, because I've had,
Oh, good.
yes, maybe I'm the clumsiest. And you know what? Even if it is so, I'm good. I don't need to explore that as much. In some cases, I'm more okay with it. Like if it's a trail, I'm familiar, like around the area that I know. But even that ones that are like I know of, but they're a little more remote, I don't do right now, for example, for me alone. Um, because it's, yeah, that's something I learned. In Lebanon, I've wanted to go there because I'm originally from there, as I said. My parents are Syrian Lebanese, but I never lived there. And it's part of this, again, the curiosity, always wanting to explore something else, something new. And sometimes we forget just exploring within. There's so much that I don't understand about myself. And a lot of it stems from also a lot of it like culture wise, like my culture, I grew up in a very different culture. Like there it's family and actually just human interaction is the center. I mean, if in some cases it's the main and only thing. So there's so much of that bonding, where everyone knows, not only the neighbor knows everyone in the village and beyond. And that's something I like didn't pay attention to before, because we forget to explore within. But I realized that oddly enough through running, because I have all that time to on my own thinking and thing, like, and I was like, huh, interesting. I love that I'm exploring all of this, but I would love to explore where I'm from, maybe learn more about it. And something I haven't done, and I couldn't think of a better way to do it than just to go do it more of the outdoorsy way. And I decided to apply. There was a grant by the Trail Sisters, which you should check out. They're absolutely amazing individuals that honestly just want to get people out there, and want to support it. So that they every now and then will have just, again, scholarships, ways to support people to go on things that matter to them. And they don't have to be extravagant. They have to just be meaningful to you. And I think they saw that in my goal with this trip and that I was proposing. And so I was grateful that I actually got that grant, and decided to go. I didn't end up, unfortunately, running the trail, but I was walking and running when it was thunderstorms and lightning. But but otherwise not running, because I had my allergies were real. That was the first time I've had it bad in Seattle. Maybe that's why. So I actually couldn't run that summer. I had developed, my asthma got pretty bad.
Oh,
So I
wow.
still decided to go because it's something that meant even more than just running. It was just, again, connecting with thing that matter, knowing more about where I come from. And that was an absolutely remarkable trip where, I mean, we'd be going, two friends actually decided to come along with me, and that was really fun. And they actually, ironically, were already thinking of going there separate from me. And then they just saw that I got this. It was an announcement. They're like, oh, wow, that's odd. That's out of a coincidence. So
No
we went
way.
there, and we'd be walking like full days, like 10 hours or so. And then we'd walk, and then everyone is saying hi. Everyone is chasing you with food. I'm not kidding you. And literally at one point, they actually were running and throwing food. And
No
I know, it's hilarious. And we were, and every time we kept on like eating our food, I'm like, oh, great. Now we have less stuff to carry. Nope, there's more food coming. I'm like, I can't carry this. But it was so
That's
sweet.
amazing.
And everyone was insisting, like, no, stop by. And we even had a family that waved at us, like, no, please come by. And we did. And then they insisted we stay over, like, no, you're not staying anywhere else. You're going to crash here tonight. And they don't know us. So they set up everything for us. They even left us their beds.
Wow.
And kept us all the food we want. And then they even left and went to see the neighbors for a celebration and left us in the house. So, and we had everything for us. And later they came and then prepared dinner and then even breakfast, and they don't know us. And this is something that I never thought I would like experience, because it's not something, why would I on purpose put it part of a trip? But that's, again, back to the getting out of your comfort zone or doing something different. So doing it the different way, going on that trail, that was why we managed to actually do that. And I got to see a side of my culture that I actually was exactly what I was looking for. I wanted that, like the bonding with people, that bonding like with each other. That's the side that I wanted to see, even more so than the than the beautiful scenery. And honestly, I don't think I could ever forget that. And that's comes back again to just going a little the non-traditional way, whether it's in your career or your life. It opens up so much, like in your mind. And that trip was absolutely remarkable. And I cried even in the airport leaving, which is even another strange story, because I left during they had the revolution then, so everything was shut down, and I actually couldn't make it to my flight because I was strapped in a mountain village because there were riots everywhere, and the whole thing was shut down. So I got rescued by a friend who, as I was telling people, was just doing aerobics with the car around to try to get me to go to the airport. So we were going like on top of things, going opposite direction of traffic on highways, try to make it.
Wow.
I had to purchase a last minute like random flight on the spot because I don't know if I'm going to even get on this. But even then, like everyone was just so everyone was trying to help me to make it there. And like they're like, no, let her go, like, and they were running, like rushing me.
Wow.
And
what an experience.
That was, I won't forget that trip. And forever, ever is interested or intrigued by Lebanon, honestly, it's a place you won't forget. There's a reason people talk about Lebanon. It's absolutely special of a place.
Yeah, and I have a few friends who are Lebanese. Actually, one of our good friends here in Seattle, she works at Amazon, and my heart went out when the explosion happened earlier this year, and she said, unfortunately, that's something that people are used to there. That was like another tragic part of 2020, I feel like, was the explosion in Beirut. So I feel like I will never appreciate the challenges you've faced from having, grown up in a place with a very different culture, come to the United States as a 16-year-old, lived on one coast, moved to another coast. But I do feel a kind of kinship in that within this career field, it often takes us away from our families, and you're expected to go to undergrad in one place and go do your PhD in another place. And I was writing about this earlier this year, of this like uproot phenomena in scientific research, where we move around and we're often really far from our families and our communities, and that makes us kind of isolated in a way. And I think that's something I've experienced with, I moved to Seattle 7 years ago, and I've had opportunities to, maybe go back to California or go to New York or wherever, but I have this hesitancy to uproot myself again, because it takes its toll. It takes its toll being away from my parents who live in Wisconsin and my sister who lives in Arizona. And I think it's kind of an unfortunate part of this field that, like, my job, or the job that I'm like so well suited to do, only exists in these certain places in the world. So I just wanted to say that I kind of understand parts of that and how hard it can be. And I think it's neat that we've both found Seattle to be such a special home for both science and the outdoors, and getting to pursue all of our passions. So
yeah, no, it's I know it's always hard, but yeah, this place just, I don't know what, if it just did it. As soon, the first day I saw it, the first time I laid my eyes on Seattle, I was like, ooh, this is it. This is nice. And I lived in California also at the time, but I think I just kept on finding excuses to go, and then to a point where people thought I just lived here. And yeah, it's always, of course, hard to be away. And I think this is something, like, for a lot of people, like, always pay attention, like, what truly matters to you. I mean, I love science. I love spending, and I do that a lot, like spend late nights away and doing my own thing, away from my partner, away from a lot of people. But it's always good to also stop and think, okay, what is important to me? Like, for me, like, the family and friends and people I love, those are always going to be, no matter what, honestly, number one. And if it meant that I won't be able to see them at all, no, I would give up everything else. And for me, like, that's still going to be the core. And it's different for everyone. So I think it's just good to keep track of, like, what really matters to you, and before it's like too late, or before you realize you're actually way behind on what you thought actually matters to you. So yeah, and with science, it's good to sometimes, yeah, take the break, and whether even for your sake. I decided to take a few days off last week, and I went completely irresponsible and not responding to anyone, because I wanted to just honestly take a break and spend time with my partner in the mountains. And I did that, but it's hard. I struggle with that sometimes, but honestly, it's good to think of other things that matter to us, like family and friends and etc.
absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's a great, kind of message from 2020, out of all the craziness and chaos that it has forced us to, remember our priorities and make sure that we have everything in balance. So I think that's probably a good note for us to maybe end on, unless there's anything else you want to talk about.
No, I think it's I'm glad that it went this way. I hope like other people also can, as I said, like, resonate with this, or have a story where it's not the typical, but I honestly don't think it's necessarily not. It's just not maybe perhaps as talked about, or not what people think is happening like in the scientist's life. And I think it's I'm glad that it went down like that way, or out of talking about like the chaotic or crazy supposed experiences that we've had, which are actually far from crazy. It's just maybe perhaps even normal for some. We just don't talk about it or share it. So I'm glad, yeah, it went that direction. And let's see if others resonate. And yeah, I'm excited to see the other people's voices as well. Let's see what everyone else has been with science.
Yeah, no, I think that's part of what I want to achieve with this, is just, being open and honest about our experiences, and how, how we became who we are, and how different things have shaped us. And I think you really bring an exciting voice to the table. And it's just, that's the kind of thing I want. I want to put that into the hands of others and say, hey, this is who we are as scientists. This is how we think. And just give them power through knowledge, right?
Exactly. I think that's what I saw, like exactly the podcast being able to do. Hear the things that most of us don't realize are there or as common because no one really shares it and gets a chance to talk about it. But I think it's really important, especially, I mean, for those starting into it, because then there's still more. When you're younger, it's hard because you're not as confident. You don't know what to expect, and there's even more so. So I want to get people to realize that, oh, hey, don't like, it's okay, everyone has gone through something, everyone has had different experiences, and that's what I could see with this podcast is like hearing all those different voices, all the different journeys people have had. You're still a scientist, and chances are if you're here doing that, there's no questioning that, honestly. So it doesn't